We've had some great guests on this show as of late, but today we hit a milestone. It's time for another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC,
Batman, Wonder Woman,
Marvel,
Spider-Man,
Image,
Spawn, Saga,
Boom,
Once and Future, Power Rangers,
or whatever book or publisher you follow,
we cover them all here.
this is the place for you.
That's right, it's for everyone.
This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
Let's get it.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I am your host, Theo, and I know in the pre-intro I said that this is a milestone, and I just realized it really is. It is our 65th episode, over 5 seasons, so I am proud and happy for that. But it's also a milestone because my guest for this episode is Joseph Illidge, writer of Milestone Universe, The Shadow Cabinet. The fourth and final issue, came out this past Wednesday, and he took the time earlier this week to sit with me to talk about that last issue and Milestone in general. So everyone who knows me knows I'm a huge Batman fan. However, as a young kid growing up in the 90s when Milestone first hit the stands in 1993, it truly flipped my mind as a comic book reader, and I have been a huge fan of the imprint ever since. So when Milestone Returns popped up in DC Infinite, the online reader for DC a few years ago, it really brought back memories. And so we've seen over these past 2 seasons with Milestone Returns how it's really been building to what we've seen in this final 4 issues with the miniseries of The Shadow Cabinet. And again, final issue is out. If you haven't read it yet, I strongly urge that you do so. And if you haven't read it yet, I ask that you pause and go take a read before coming back and watching this episode, because we do talk about the issue itself, and so there will be some mild spoilers in it, and we just couldn't avoid that. But again, I truly enjoyed this. Just speaking with someone who's had such a history with Milestone. He got his start working at Milestone as an intern. He considered the late, great Dwayne McDuffie as his mentor. He's had the opportunity to work with the likes of Reggie Hudlin and Dennis Cowan. And so just being able to sit and talk to him about that and pick his brain over all he's done, not just at Milestone, but at DC in general. He did a lot of editorial work over there as well. It was just a pleasure to do over the past hour. And so that's what we're going to do for this episode. I'm not going to do a top 5 once the interview is over, because Shadow Cabinet is my number 1 book for the week. I truly love this issue and how, in the end, and we speak about it in the interview, but I love that how it really brought everything that you have read from season 1 and season 2 of Milestone Returns full circle to what we get in the Shadow Cabinet in those 4 issues, especially the last issue. So yeah, it had everything that I needed with regards to being a fan of Milestone Media and the Milestone imprint. All those years, 30 years later, it's still loved by this comic book reader here. So it was my book of the week, so I won't need to do a countdown after that. But here it is, my sit-down conversation with writer Joseph Illidge, talking about Milestone Universe, The Shadow Cabinet, number 4, the series as a whole, and just stuff in general with the Milestone imprint. So I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you on the other side. Hey folks, it's Theo. I am sitting here with Joseph Illidge, writer of Milestone Universe, The Shadow Cabinet. Joseph, how are you doing?
Doing good. How are you, Theo?
I am doing well. To say it's February and it's 80 degrees here in the South and it's going to be in the 40s by the time the week is over. So
Wow, that's
life,
wild.
yeah, life in Louisiana. So
Gotcha.
the Shadow Cabinet, issue 4. Man, that was I was not expecting that. Let me just go jump right into these questions if I can. So how fun was it putting this series together? Because by the time we get to the end of this, you touch a good chunk of the Milestone universe. How fun was that?
For me, it was really great because Milestone is the company where I got my start in comics back in 1993. I started there as an intern, and the company was founded by Derek T. Dingle, Dwayne McDuffie, Michael Davis, and Dennis Cowan, and Christopher Priest actually was a co-founder of Milestone. So getting back to these characters in the 21st century and this different iteration of the characters that still has the core qualities of the characters that I worked with was really an exciting opportunity. I was really thrilled to be able to work with Reggie Hudlin and Dennis Cowan and work with editor Marquise Draper and executive editor Chris Conroy over at DC Comics to really have the opportunity to craft a story of this scale, of this epic quality. So it was really a blast. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun work.
So you've kind of been on both sides of the creative table, both as a writer and as an editor. You've done some editing as well. Wh-
Quite a bit.
which is easier and which is funner to do?
So neither are easy. So I wouldn't, categorize either of them as easier than the other. Both are requiring a certain set of skills, and it takes a lot of work. So if you're talking about being an editor, I was really taught editing by Dwayne McDuffie, who was the editor in chief and co-founder of Milestone Comics. And then from there, I went on to DC Comics, where I became the first editor of color in the Batman editorial department. And my mentor there was Denny O'Neil, one of the most legendary editors in North American comics and legendary writers of books going from Batman to The Question. And so it was from those two that I really got my, nucleic education of what editing involved. And editing, you have to understand story, but you are a caretaker of the characters and the worlds under your purview. You are responsible for helping to maintain those intellectual properties. When you bring in creators to work on books, these creators have to be talented. They have to be able to meet deadlines. And as an editor, you're dealing on a day-to-day basis with quality control, and you're dealing with making sure that the story moves forward and that the integrity of the characters and the intellectual properties are being maintained. If you see that a line is being stepped over, a crucial line regarding a character, then you are the guardian of that, and you have to push back and you have to enforce that, because all of these characters have rules and those rules have to be maintained. That's why Batman can be maintained from 1939 to 2025, because there's a maintenance of rules that governs Batman and the cast of characters in Gotham City. Another part of that is it's really good to be a people person, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of creators, different personalities. You want to be sociable. You want to be a really good communicator. And part of being a good communicator is being a good listener, right? You want to be able to hear what your creators have to say, engage in productive creative discussions, and you want to be able to help them be the best creators that they can be. I have an art education, so I understand art. I was trained in it. I understand it in terms of the craft, in terms of storytelling. right? And so it's good to be able to understand the different artistic components of making comic books. So when you speak to creators, you're speaking to them in their language, right? So that's an encapsulation of editing. Now, when you're talking about writing, that's an entirely different set of muscles that you're using, right? Because as an editor, you can look at story from the 10,000-foot view and make sure that your creators are operating in the story, that the story is always first. As a writer, now you're at the ground level and you're building narratives from the ground up, and you have to really understand certain core ideas. You have to understand character development. You have to understand a theme. So what is the theme of your story, right? And what is the theme on an issue by issue basis? And what is the theme on a storyline basis, right? And you have to understand something like causality. So if you write a story and it's just one thing happening after the other and one thing happening after the other, that's boring, right? Part of what's involved in a story is that unexpected events force characters to go in different directions. So that's cause and effect. And your story has to have an organic sense of cause and effect, right? So those are some of what's at the core of writing. But what is similar in terms of editing and writing, at the very least, is that the story is first, right? As human beings, we have egos. Our egos can empower us or embolden us, but the story always comes first. And when you're talking about writing, story starts with a compelling character and a clear theme and a world that has components or characters that either challenge the theme or support the theme, right? And challenge the character or support the character.
So you mentioned characters, and that kind of leads to my next question. How did you come about the balance of who is, who wasn't included in the Shadow Cabinet in its miniseries? Were there some characters that you really wanted to include but couldn't because you would have been writing forever? We like, oh, I got to
Right,
stop at some point. So
right.
how did you come about finding that balance as far as the characters and their place on the page?
So that's a great question. The first thing I had to do is really think about the core characters of the Milestone universe, right? Those core characters are Icon and Rocket, Hardware, Static, right? Those four are at the nucleus. You can also put the Blood Syndicate there, or you can put the Blood Syndicate kind of like at the ring outside of the atomic nucleus, right? And then the second ring is the Shadow Cabinet, right? So it was very important to focus on the nucleic characters first, right? Because, Milestone relaunch happened in 2020 in a digital comic called Milestone Returns Zero, which would end up becoming a physical comic. And then that would lead in 2021 to the Milestone relaunch, which started with 3 ongoing series or limited series: Static, season 1, Icon and Rocket, season 1, and Hardware, season 1, right? So ever since then, there have been a series of storylines that have been happening in the Milestone universe. And the goal of Shadow Cabinet was to be the culmination of these different plot lines into one epic. So when Shadow Cabinet was announced and I started talking about it and teasing it on social media or in interviews, I would compare it to Avengers Endgame for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? And the way Avengers Endgame was the culmination point of 10 to 11 years of stories, right? And so that's what Shadow Cabinet had to be. So I had to know which characters to focus on. In terms of the Shadow Cabinet themselves, you know, people who are familiar with Milestone Generation 1 know that there's quite a number of Shadow Cabinet characters. And that era of Shadow Cabinet was basically like a covert operations comic book. So basically, it was Mission Impossible meets the Avengers, and it came out in the early to mid 90s before DC's Authority, before Marvel's The Ultimates, right? But this story has quite a bit of characters already. So I couldn't pull all of those Shadow Cabinet characters into their 21st century versions. So I had to think about, okay, who are the core characters? So you have to have Dharma, who's the leader who can see through time. He is of East Asian descent. His right hand enforcer is Iron Butterfly. So I kind of feel like you have to have the leader, you have to have the enforcer. For a third character, it was actually the idea of Marquise Draper, my editor, to bring in Anansi.
Okay.
And Anansi was originally introduced in the Static Shock animated series in the early part of the century. And he would be reintroduced in the comic books in a one-shot called Static Team Up Anansi. So it was Marquise's idea to make Anansi that third character, which I thought was brilliant because he's the only one that's pretty lighthearted. He has a sense of humor. Dharma is stoic. Iron Butterfly, I don't think she was born with a humorous bone in her body. And so it was really great to have Anansi be in there and add a different type of quality to the core Shadow Cabinet. And, you know,
Brought an
in
awesome
any
balance.
story, I really had to think about the Shadow Cabinet balance and the cast balance. And then I had to figure out, okay, in telling this story, who is the core character, right? And I decided that it would be Rocket. And we can talk about that more, but I thought that Rocket would be the perfect character to be on a journey in this story, but also be the window into this fantastic world for new readers.
Yeah, I definitely have my. It's probably my final question that really looks at not only Rocket and her place in as a central figure in this story, but also Static because you know he's had a journey from season one. He has some doubt that really has to be answered before we see him really take his place. You know, when he comes
Yes,
back in issue 4, but.
yes.
But before I get there, I want to talk a little bit about the art because you've had some great artists on this series with Daryl Banks and Adigan Ilhan, and we've seen Dennis Cowan. He made an appearance not only doing the covers, but he made an appearance in issue 3 doing some pages there as well. How was it working with those guys?
It's pretty amazing. Listen, any comic book writer should be very candid and say that, you know, amazing artists make them look better. Amazing artists elevate the writing of comics. And so you're talking about Daryl Banks, who is one of the best storytellers in comics and has been for decades. Adigun Ilhan, who has a really dramatic style of storytelling. And he was a graduate of the Milestone Initiative, which was a program that Milestone did with DC Comics and Warner Brothers and Ally Bank, in which they brought creators from different walks of life to DC Comics and Milestone and basically helped them raise their skills to the next level and then had them work on different things throughout Milestone and throughout DC Comics. And so having Adigun there and his dramatic sense of storytelling was great. You know, Dennis, listen, I mean, Dennis is a legend. Dennis is the co-founder of Milestone. So I've been a fan of his work, I think, since The Question and Batman Blind Justice in Detective Comics. So when he came on for that third issue, that was a personal request because we were dealing with the origin of the Alvas,
Hmm.
right? And the Alvas, that's a family of wealth that basically is part of the infrastructure of the Milestone universe. And so Edwin Alva, the main character from this family, was first introduced in the very first Milestone comic, Hardware #1 in 1993. Hardware was drawn by Dennis Cowan, and I just thought it would be
Full
truly
circle.
fitting. So I said, hey, I said to Marquise, is this possible? And Marquise spoke to Dennis, and, he said yes. And it just brought everything together, right? Taking us through that 100-year journey of the Alva family, 101 years. Dennis's art was perfect for that. And then for the fourth issue of Shadow Cabinet, we had another guest artist, which was Ray Anthony Height. Ray and I have known each other almost 10 years now, probably 10 years. And when I was editing a line of comics for Lion Forge, which was basically the 21st century milestone called Catalyst Prime, Ray was one of the artists on one of those 7 titles. It was a teenage superhero duo book called Superb, which I will always love. So getting to work with Ray and have him illustrate pages that I've written, that was pretty amazing. So all in all, to say, I feel blessed. I'm so thrilled with how every issue came out. I feel like, and then let's not forget colorist Chris Sotomayor.
Yes.
Um, Chris and I have known each other. We go back to Milestone Generation 1 in the 90s. We're good friends. Chris is a trailblazing colorist. And so he was the final glue that brought everything together aesthetically, along with the lettering. And so, getting to work with them was great. And I feel like we just gelled even more and more as a team, issue by issue. And I feel like the fans see that. They see that as a team, we brought our A game every issue, every page to this. And it shows. And issue 4 was really a culmination of all of that, down to those covers for issue 4. The cover with all the heroes by Dennis Cowan and Prentice Rollins and Chris Sotomayor. The cover with Static and Rocket by Nicholas Draper Ivy. It's like it's just perfect, right?
Yeah, I tell this story, and Dennis Cowan knows this because I told it to him. I was supposed to meet him at a con several years ago, and life and work and everything happened, so I wasn't able to make it. It was supposed to be at Memphis Comic Fest that I was supposed to go and get him to sign some of my
Yeah.
stuff, because I'm a child of the 80s, and I was there when Milestone debuted. I picked up Hardware and Static when they first
Yeah.
debuted. So it had
Yeah.
a huge influence on me as a person of color, as a black man, when those books were released. And so I could not see him in Memphis. But then I got word he was going to be at GalaxyCon in Columbus that December. So
Yeah.
my crazy self flew to Columbus, went to GalaxyCon, met him, took my pictures, got my autographs for that one day,
That's
did
awesome.
all of that, and I left. And he laughs at it. He like, I can't believe you did that. I can't, because when I never had the pleasure of meeting someone like Dennis Cowan, who had such an influence on me as a comic book reader. And, I haven't had the chance to meet Reggie yet. And unfortunately, we won't be able to meet some of the other members,
Yes.
because
Yes.
they've left us.
Yes.
But when you have that opportunity, you have to jump at it. And, I did that, to meet Dennis Cowan, and now I see him almost every year. I saw him this past October at New York Comic Con, and he's
Oh,
like,
nice.
yeah, he's like, you still telling that story about meeting me in Columbus? Yes, I do. I tell it to everybody I meet, and that's just the influence that, when you meet such legendary characters or legendary creators such as him. You
Yes.
want people to know, and he was one of those influential. I can't draw worth a damn, but I can tell you I have every compendium of Milestone that's been put out, and when Compendium 4 comes out, I'll be getting that one as well
There it
because
is.
of the influence of those guys that decided to come together and do a different type of universe, a different type of story with different type of characters that weren't around before they came about in
Well,
1993.
yes, 100% changed my life.
Yeah,
Changed
yeah,
my life, set me on the path that leads me to talk to you here today, you know, 32 years later.
yeah, and it's still going strong. So let me ask this question because I scour social media a lot, and Milestone has a lot of fans. And there was someone that posted this that really had me thinking because they posted that they really would love to see Milestone in the main DC universe. And there was a point in time where they were. For example, Static was a member of the Titans.
Yes.
Is there a place in the main DC universe for Milestone, or is the Dakotaverse, aka Planet M, is it fine where it is? It doesn't need to be in that main continuity. It's okay where it is.
I don't think there's a single authoritative answer on that, right? Because that question opens up multiple perspectives, right? So, one of the things about the Dakotaverse, as it's called, because it's centered around the fictional city of Dakota. One of the things about the Dakotaverse being part of its own continuity is that it can be governed by its own rules. And there are advantages to that. There are dramatic advantages from a storytelling point of view, from a character point of view. When you have less of something, that something has a greater kind of import to it. So the fewer heroes you have in a fictional universe, then more weighs on those characters. Now, take it to the flip side. If it's part of the DC superhero universe, that means that it is part of a legacy that is almost 100 years old, right? Because the DC superhero universe, I guess we would say, began in 1938 with Action Comics #1, right? And we're 13 years away from 2038, right? So
Right.
you're talking about those characters would be part of a legacy that has crossed centuries, that is almost a century old itself. And then you can start playing with different dynamics, right? And you can readjust time, you can readjust continuity, and there can be a fun in that too. So I don't think either possibility is right or wrong. What I think it comes down to is, I think it comes down to editorial supervision and the right creators, because it's the creators who take these myths and really enhance them. So I'll give you an example. So in the mid 80s, of course, there was a big DC event, which is basically the white whale of DC Comics, called Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was done by Marv Wolfman and George Perez and various other creators. And Crisis on Infinite Earths led to a whole new DC Comics continuity. Rumor has it that there was at least one editor at DC Comics at the time who was not on board with the whole new continuity, and in at least one book in their office basically ignored Crisis. And you're thinking, well, that's just one book. Yeah, but all it takes is one weak link to break a chain.
Yeah.
Right? either everyone is on board or the plan collapses, right? So if we're talking about a future in which Milestone's Dakotaverse becomes part of the DC universe, that really takes planning, supervision, and the right creators. The creators who are dedicated to building out what a new future would look like in which all those superheroes coexist, right? So either way would be interesting, right? And to your point, we've seen different variations of that already. I mean, we mentioned Dwayne McDuffie, God rest his soul. There was a time when he was a writer on Justice League of America. And during that time, Milestone characters and DC characters coexisted, and he had to write those stories. And he actually wrote a series called Milestone Forever, which was a two-part prestige format series that ended the first Milestone universe and fused the two universes. So he created a story reason why it happened, and he closed the door on one single universe and opened the door to, well, he closed the door on two separate universes and he opened the door to a combined universe, right? So there's different ways to approach it.
Yeah, and you also saw him do that when he was working on Justice League Unlimited, when he brought Icon and Static to that universe as well. So it's definitely
Yes,
possible.
yes, 100%. So, it's interesting. Both approaches have their, I would say, their advantages and their challenges, right? And as a creator, depending on what the circumstances are, you have to work with that, right? I was fortunate enough to kind of get the best of both worlds because of the mini series called Icon versus Hardware, which Reginald Hudlin spearheaded and co-wrote with Leon Chills. It was co-illustrated by Dennis Cowan and Yasmin Flores Montanez. And Brainiac invaded the Milestone universe, right?
Right.
Because there are different brainiacs throughout the multiverse. That was something that was actually, I think, discussed in DC Comics recently in the
Yes.
whole House of Brainiac event and other events. And so one of those brainiacs invaded the Milestone universe and invaded the Milestone Earth. And so I was able to look at that event and think about the importance of that event, an alien invasion from Brainiac in this world of much fewer superheroes in the DC universe. What would be the ripple effects of that? And so being able to do a time jump 6 months after the events of Icon versus Hardware and bring Milestone readers into a recalibrated Milestone universe, but bring new readers into a very, I would say, a very mature superhero universe, right? It presented a lot of really good creative opportunities for me. And so I was able to take advantage of the presence of Superman's arch enemy in the Dakotaverse.
Now, you just used the word that I think really tells a story about the character that I think are the central points, and you kind of focused on them when you're mentioning those four pillars
Mhm.
of the Dakotaverse of Milestone, and that was with Rocket and with Static. And
Yes.
if we go back to season one of both Static and Icon and Rocket,
Yes.
we see them grow a lot. Virgil throughout much of season one and two is growing, and you can see, you know, a sense of immaturity as he's starting to get his power and grow as a character. And we see he we see here in Shadow Cabinet that he is struggling because, Brainiac invaded, and then there's the situation with his mom. And the only thing he's worried about right now is protecting his house. When when Raquel tries to recruit him to help out.
Yes.
And he doesn't want to do it. I need to watch out for my family, And we see a maturity of her as well, to the point that by the time we get to the end of issue 4, it's no longer Icon and Rocket. It's Rocket and Icon. That's a hell of a growth
Rocket and
factor, right?
Static.
Yeah, it's a hell of a growth factor right there when you can go up to Augustus Freeman and say, "Hey, it's time for Rocket and Icon, not the other way around."
Right.
So talk about how, you know, we already mentioned that they're pillars of the Milestone universe, but it seems as we get to the end of this issue, you're
Mhm.
not only saying they're part of the 4 pillars, but those are the 2 central figures of Milestone. Is that kind of what you're saying by the time we get to the end of this issue? Because as we get to the end, they're the 2 that's standing on the rooftop of this building,
Yes.
alone,
Yes.
talking about
Yes.
what's next and watching over Dakota.
Yes. It's Rocket and Static. They are the future lead heroes. They're the Superman and Wonder Woman of the Milestone universe going forward. And, so I talked to you earlier about theme, right? As a writer, you have to know your theme. So the core theme of this story, in part, was the inheritance of power. What do you do when you get it, even if you didn't ask for it, right? And so Rocket was forced on a journey because due to the events of the Brainiac invasion, basically the heroes had all gone in their separate holes. And she felt that the world needed to be saved. And if she's the only one that's going to do it, then so be it. So she was out there day after day, night after night, fighting the fight alone, right? Then you have Virgil Hawkins, who is Static. Now, what's happened to him? Well, I really wanted to think about this from a naturalistic point of view, right? Like, sometimes in superhero comics, there are superhero character rules. I wanted to deal with some human rules. So let's deal with a thing. Ever since Static season 1, you had a supervillain burn down his house, right? Burn his house. He and his family are like now out. You had a supervillain come pretty close to killing him, right? The first villain we're talking about is Hot Streak. The second one we're talking about is Ebon.
Ebon. Mm-hmm.
Then you have the Brainiac invasion, right? Then you have, because part of the Icon versus Hardware story was Hardware traveling through time to try to prevent slavery from ever happening, and then creating these ripple effects that created these cracks in the timeline and continuity. And that led to fissures, right, that dropped historical figures into our world. In some cases, they were dinosaurs, they were creatures. In one case, they were Nazis from the Third Reich.
We see
And
Vandal
Adolf
Savage.
Hitler, right? Vandal Savage. And so Nazis led by Adolf Hitler ended up in Static's neighborhood, right? Now, that's not a casual thing. I want you to think about that. What if you looked out your window right now and like a battalion of Nazis was just like marching down the street with their bayonets and their guns in your neighborhood? That's nightmarish. And there's no good end for you, right? This happens this close to his family, right? That's traumatic. The cumulative effect of 1 year of all of those things that I just mentioned are traumatic. And Static is not prepared to live in a world without his family. If one of his family members got killed, he doesn't know what he would do, and he doesn't want to find out. And so then he says, I'm staying home. I'm taking care of my family, and I'm taking care of my neighborhood. The world, let other people take care of that. You step into my neighborhood, you cross the border, you try to pull any crime on my block, near my family, I'm going to kick your ass.
Yeah, and I
I'm going
think
to
what
kick your ass harder than you could have imagined it could be kicked.
And I think what really
Right?
set him on that point was when the little kid in season two died, because
Yes, Quincy.
yes,
Quincy.
he really he considered him a little brother because he was watching him more than he was watching anyone else, and then all of a sudden we see he get kidnapped and he dies. And
Yes.
it it was a real huge effect on him. I think that more than anything might have set him on this course to where I'm staying home because
Well, yes. Yeah. Again, it was cumulative effect, right? It's not one thing, it's when all of the dominoes fall, right? And they fall on you. And how do you handle that? How do you emotionally handle that? What's the conclusion that comes from that? Right. And so that puts Static on a journey, right? He's still heroic, but he was afraid.
mm,
He was afraid to lose somebody else. He was afraid to lose a family member. He was afraid of failing big time, the big failure,
yeah,
right? And it was his mother who had to give him permission to leave.
yes,
And it was very important that they had that discussion, um, because for those people who are familiar with the Static Shock cartoon, unlike the comic books in the Static Shock cartoon, Virgil's mother died before he got his powers and became Static. And in superhero comics, the intact Black family is an endangered species. Most Black families in superhero comics are broken. Number of characters don't even, I don't know. I don't know where Luke Cage's mom and dad is. I don't even know where Sam Wilson's mom and dad is. I think I know where his sister or his cousin is that I saw in the latest Sam Wilson Captain America
right,
number
right,
one. But it's like a lot of these Black characters do not have intact families. Static in that way is kind of like a unicorn. And so the conversation with him and his mother deals with that. It's like it deals with the importance of family. It deals with the fact that we need permission sometimes to do the things that we're afraid to do. And there's a particular bond between a mother and her children, right? Because they were inside her, right? There's something metaphysical, there's something spiritual. It's different. And so I felt like that conversation had to be between the two of them. And if I'm going to keep it 100 for you, I think it's very important to show love
yeah,
in comics, family love, Black family love. I think it's of high importance.
yeah. It
And so, yes. And so that was at the core of this, just the same way that Rocket's whole story is framed by Rocket writing a letter to her mother.
mhm.
You see? So again, you've got these two young people on different journeys, but they're grounded by family.
And they matured throughout
100%.
it all in different ways at that.
Yes.
We saw in Hardware versus Icon, Raquel had to go off to private school and she experienced some battles, but again it allowed her to grow and it allowed her to be okay without Icon being there. She eventually meets up with Hardware, but she was okay without there being an Icon and Rocket, to the point to where when they get back together again, it's no longer Icon and Rocket, it's Rocket and Icon, and
Right.
I loved that point of maturity with her, but I gotta ask, at what point did you know you were gonna use that line from Static Shock in issue 4 when Virgil told Alva, "I'm gonna put the shock in your system."
I knew that from the very beginning.
Yeah,
Like that, like that was, there are certain moments that we've gone the whole way for. That was one of them. That's the page that in my mind, that page should be evergreen. You should look at that page 20 years from now. And that page holds. And that was for the fans. That
yeah.
was for everybody. It's like you
I
wanted to
marked
say
out.
it.
Yes, I definitely marked out when I get to that page and he didn't lay it out Alva Edwin Alva and he's just like, hey, I'm static and I'm gonna put the shock in your system. I'm like, there it is, standing note
Yep.
right there. I'm done. We go ahead, dispose of him. We can just call it today now.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yeah. It got my heartstrings too. Like when again, it's one of those things that's like you're building towards, and we put Virgil through such a thing, man. So when he says that, he's not just saying it to Alva, he's saying it to himself,
yeah,
right?
I mean,
He's like, I am static, right? Forevermore. I will never not wear the blue and yellow again. I will never not be here for the world again. He's saying it to himself.
yeah, and we've seen from season one to now the evolution of his outfit to where he's in his Static Shock outfit. But
Yeah.
there's a difference between having the outfit and having the outfit with that line. And that I'm telling you, I just all I could do was just clap. So I thank you for that because that just brought it again full circle for me as someone who born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, going home to watch Static Shock on TV and seeing McDuffie's creation, you know, come full circle from what he did for that TV series to seeing it on the page as well. And I thank you for that. Joseph
You're
Illidge,
welcome. It was a
it,
team effort. It was a team
yeah,
effort, man.
it, before I let you go, I do this for every episode, every
Yes.
interview. It's
Okay.
time for rapid fire. Two choices. There's no right or wrong answers.
All
But
right.
here we go. DC edition. All right. Let me know when you're ready.
Let's go.
Static or Black Lightning.
Static.
All right. Rocket or Vixen.
Rocket.
All right. Kyle Rayner or Hal Jordan.
Kyle Rayner.
Okay. Barry Allen or Wally West.
Wally West.
All right. There we go.
Yeah.
Last one.
Okay.
Batman the Animated Series or Justice League Unlimited?
Ooh, you are not a nice
That's the one.
person.
That's the one I ask
Oh,
every person, and it always get the
oh.
same response.
Okay, 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 okay. That's real tough. But I gotta say Batman the Animated Series.
Okay.
Because you don't get Justice League Unlimited without Batman the Animated Series. You don't get that Batman. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
Like that Batman was a construction over time and different cartoons. So when you get to the Batman, who he and Superman are the only ones facing down Darkseid at the end, that starts in Batman the Animated Series, man. So that's the only reason I could answer that question that way, because both of those cartoons, brilliant, still unsurpassed.
And
Just a
iconic
fact.
for various reasons.
Unsurpassed.
Various reasons.
100%.
Yeah.
The listen, Batman, as you understand him now as an intellectual property, has a straight line debt to Batman the Animated Series, right? Which is an extension of Tim Burton's Batman film. You know what I mean? But Batman the Animated Series was an early nucleus, an early thing that kind of just grew and grew and grew to the point where when I was a Batman editor, you better believe I was well versed in Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah. I tell people there are two things that will make me say Justice League Unlimited. One is Dwayne McDuffie.
100%. So you got to know how hard it was for me to say what I said,
Yeah,
because that's my mentor. I love that man. Part of what I did with Shadow Cabinet was for him. So you got to know it's hard for me
yeah.
to not pick that. So that's a good answer.
One is Dwayne McDuffie, and
Yeah.
two was that was the first time you had every single character of the DC universe that you could possibly think of show up. They may not
Yep.
have been there for every episode, but God dog it, they were there for an episode or two or three, but they had a chance to show up, and you kind of see it with what Mark Waid is doing now. But
Oh, 100%.
yeah,
Like that is in debt to it. And I remember an episode of Justice League Unlimited where there was like this invasion of these technological insects, and they called everybody. They
yeah,
called everybody. And then John Jones had to turn the satellite into a weapon and shoot a beam onto the earth to create a blast radius. And due to the events of that episode, that changed the cartoon, because then you had all the government and military people being like, wait a minute, they have a satellite in space. They just shot a laser beam on the planet. They could wipe us all out. We're not cool with that. So
yeah,
that episode where they like brought all those members together, it changed the direction of the series. And, among other things that Justice League Unlimited did, it gave us the first interracial kiss in animation with John Stewart Green Lantern and Shira Thal Hawkgirl, and that brilliant episode that connected it to Batman Beyond.
yeah. Which is weird you mentioned that first interracial kiss because we now see it come full circle in Jeremy Adams' Green Lantern Corps
Mm,
because John and Shahira are meeting up
look,
again.
you
So,
see, you see. I
but
mean, it's the planting of the seeds, and it's the ripple effects of the pebbles in the pond, and it spans decades, and it's just amazing, right?
yeah, but I am like you as well. It was tough for me to pick the animated series over
Oh,
JLU because again of that influence Dwayne McDuffie had and
yes.
just, everything a lot of people don't know just how much influence Dwayne had, not just in animated with JLU, but just I mean just all of the stories that he's written, before his passing. And I
Yes.
remember picking up a trade paperback of just a bunch of stories, not Milestone, but
Hmm.
just DC work from Dwayne McDuffie, and just
Yes.
to
Yes.
see all of the characters that he touched throughout his career is
Yes.
just amazing. He was beyond Milestone. He is Milestone with Dennis and Reggie and everyone else, but he was beyond that. And yeah, it was real tough to say, yeah, I'm gonna pick the animated series over that because of the
Oh,
influence he had on that. But
100%.
yeah, I
And more
mean,
people are learning every day. More people are learning about what Dwayne brought to comics, what Dwayne brought to pop culture. And he was such a brilliant storyteller that no matter what characters he touched, um, he got them, he nailed them, he invested in those characters. But I really think Milestone was the best that he gave to the world through the development of these characters who would stand the test of time, through creating a truly inclusive superhero universe. And you have these publishers who in the 21st century are patting themselves on the back for doing things. And it's like, Milestone did that in the 90s, bro.
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah. I mean,
teenage pregnancy,
yeah,
Milestone did that. The full range of the queer experience, Milestone did that. I mean, Milestone did all the things, right? And so I feel like that was the best gift that he helped provide. And so it was, again, an honor to be able to write a story that was a tribute to that and a tribute to character and story and, something for the fans, right? Like, there, as you said early on, there are a lot of Milestone fans. And, you know, I wanted them to have their faith rewarded,
Well,
right? And you
mine
reward it
too.
with giving them
My,
something that shows it,
all I can say is I hope that last page was a sign that there is more to come. Because again, for me, who as a high school senior had Milestone to fall to for
Mm-hmm,
stories that really reflected what I was seeing in real life growing
mm-hmm.
up in the housing projects of New Orleans.
Yes.
That meant a lot. And to see it return with Milestone Returns in a 21st century format only wants me to see it more and more. And I remember when I posted about my review for issue 3 that Milestone needed an ongoing series. I mean that, it's because it has this place and it has this fan base that's not going anywhere.
That's
It's
right.
not going anywhere at all. And I am hoping to see more of it. And I'm hoping that last page is just signaling that there is more Milestone to come. Joseph Illidge, thank you so much for this experience. Where can fans keep up with what you're doing? How can they keep up with what you're doing?
All right. Well, first off, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. And, I really appreciate what people like you are doing and helping get our stories out there through the conversation. So thank you for your work. Where can I not be found? I'm all over the socials. I am Joe Illidge on Facebook. I am Joseph P. Illidge on X and Blue Sky. I am Illmaster1 on Instagram. I am Joseph P. Illidge on TikTok and Joseph Philip Illidge on LinkedIn. So I am easy to find and I love connecting with the people and the fans.
Well, I will have links to all of that in the show notes, so please give them a follow. Give this series. If you haven't picked up issue 4 yet, it is out on shelves now. Milestone Universe, The Shadow Cabinet. This is Joseph Illidge. Joseph, thank you so much for this experience. Again, I truly enjoyed everything about all 4 issues of this miniseries. I wish we could have gotten more. Thank you for joining me on the Comic Ben Comic Book Podcast. I truly, truly appreciate this experience and this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Theo.
All right. And I am going to stop recording. Oh, we pressed the wrong button. Oh, no. So again, I want to thank Joseph Illidge for just taking the time out of his busy schedule and sitting with me to talk about the Shadow Cabinet and the Milestone Universe in general. Again, by the time it was all said and done, it became more of a conversation than an interview, and I truly thank him uh, again for taking this time to sit with me. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I hope to have him back on again. Uh, Again, there is no top 5, top 3 of anything this week. This was really the highlight. Again, it was my top book with everything that I did read. Just waiting to see how everything came full circle with the Shadow Cabinet and how we saw the return of so many characters from the Milestone imprint, knowing that there's still plenty more that can come. And I hope this wasn't the end of Milestone. I'm pretty sure that it's not, just knowing DC's commitment to that imprint and the history that the imprint has had with fans. I am definitely a fan. I know Compendium 4 is going to be coming out pretty soon. I'll be putting my order in for that simply because I've loved everything about Milestone. And, I have access to it all the time. I could just read it in DCU Infinite, but just having those books that I can pick up and read and hold from time to time is also just a highlight for me being a huge Milestone fan. Uh, next week. So next week I was hoping to have writer Tommy Lee Edwards on the show, the writer of Gotcha Man, Only One Earth. So we were scheduled to get together. However, he came under the weather. So I am giving him a chance to recuperate, and I hope to have him on at a future episode. So get well soon, Tommy, and can't wait to talk to you soon. So next week, we'll be talking about comics, and there's a good bit of stuff that's scheduled to come out. So over at Marvel, there will be The Ultimate Spider-Man number 14 from Jonathan Hickman and Marco Checchetto. He's back on drawing duties. Also coming out at Marvel is the first issue of Red Hulk, with Red Hulk number 1. So with Captain America being out, the new Captain America movie with focus on Sam as Captain America. And we have Red Hulk that made his debut in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We get the comics that follow right behind it, so I'll be taking a look at that. Then over at DC Comics, we have Absolute Wonder Woman number 5 from Kelly Thompson and Hayden Sherman. Then we also have Superman number 23 from writer Joshua Williamson and Dan Mora. We'll also be getting Justice League Unlimited number 4 from Mark Waid and Dan Mora. Dan Mora is very busy these days, but I love it. As a Dan Mora fan, I won't complain. Staying at DC, we have Green Lantern number 20 from Jeremy Adams with art from Jack Herbert. Also at DC, we have the next issue of Black Canary, Best of the Best. This is issue number 4 from Tom King with art from Ryan Sook. So we'll be going into round 4 to see how Dinah stands up against Lady Shiva. I'm still waiting for that shoe to drop with regards to what's going to happen between Dinah and Shiva, because it's just hard for me to imagine Lady Shiva being beaten by anyone, much less Dinah Lance. And that's not a critique or complaint against Dinah. It's just the history and the ability of Lady Shiva that has followed her throughout her history. It just makes me feel something is coming with regards to this battle between those two. And knowing Tom King, it probably is. Then also coming out on next week, we have Detective Comics number 1094 from Tom Taylor and Mikhail Janin. It's been a little bit of a struggle following Detective, especially with the storyline that's going on, with the fact that Bruce is sleeping with the daughter of his parents' murderer. So that's something that just feels odd to say it in the best of terms. So we'll see how that arc continues from Tom Taylor and Mikhail Janin. Now, I will say the art has been superb. I had no doubt in that. But the story has been a little bit weird for me to follow. And I'm simply not a fan of these storylines that just cast doubt on Bruce's parents, both Thomas and Martha. Chip Zdarsky did it with his run with regards to Thomas possibly having an illegitimate child, and now we have this with Thomas saving a life, but that life end up taking theirs, and these bad decisions by the Waynes, blah 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 blah. So I'm not a fan of these stories that cast Bruce's parents in a bad light, but we'll see how it goes. I've been reading Detective for as long as I can remember, much like I've been reading Batman, despite how it may feel about the creators on it. Moving on over to Image, Radiant Black returns with Radiant Black number 31 from writers Joe Clark and Kyle Higgins, and we have art from Eduardo Ferrigato. So the Catalyst War is over. The decision has been made. Marshall is the one and true Radiant Black. He wasn't my vote. I voted for Nathan. Sorry, I did. But we now will see how things go forward in the Massiveverse, with there now being one true Radiant Black with Marshall. So we'll see how that plays out. I've already read the issue, but I'll hold off my thoughts until then. Moving on over to IDW, we have the 7th issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from writer Jason Aaron with art from Juan Ferreira. This has been a surprisingly great series, and my exposure to the Turtles in comic books were always with the crossovers that they did with Batman from James Tynion and Freddie Williams III. But sitting down and reading this series from Jason Aaron has just been an absolute gem, as we see the Turtles now back in New York after dealing with I'll just say their personal demons in those first 4 issues. So we'll see how things continue as they return to New York, find themselves fugitives from the DA who has brought on the Foot Clan as soldiers. Staying at IDW, Star Trek Defiant number 24 from Christopher Cantwell and Angel Unzueto. Again, Defiant has been my favorite Star Trek book, other than Strange New Worlds when a miniseries come out. But Christopher Cantwell has just been doing a great job with carrying this series and these characters. And I know we are getting closer and closer to the Lore War. That's supposed to be the huge event for this year, but I am going to continue enjoying this until we get there. I believe that Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly are going to be doing the majority of the storytelling once the event starts, but I'll be enjoying Defiant until then and beyond. Moving on over to Dynamite. I'm frowning a little bit because we're getting closer to the end. We have Space Ghost number 10 from writer David Pepose and art from Jonathan Lau. Again, we're getting closer to the end. This was a 12-issue series. I know that Dynamite has put out information about the annual as well, which will be that 13th issue of the whole run. So I'll be looking to see what goes on with this. Again, I've been enjoying Space Ghost from the start. Again, telling my age, watching the original series as it came on TV back in the day. But we'll see how David Pepose starts to wind this down with the 10th issue of Space Ghost, issue number 10 of 12. Moving on over to Mad Cave Studios, we have Gotcha Man number 7 from Cullen Bunn with art from Chris Batista. I said this when I did my research with regards to Only One Earth. It's hard for me to see both the one-shots in the miniseries that Tommy Lee Edwards is doing and the regular series that Cullen Bunn is doing and think that they're in the same universe. But I don't care. They both provide a different perspective of the Science Ninja team and the mythos that is Gotcha Man that I am enjoying. I'm enjoying both of them. I can kind of get both of what I'm looking for in those characters from both of these series. And I'm just loving them both. So we get the 7th issue out. I've already read it and it's really good. But we'll talk a little bit more about it if it's somehow able to make it into my top 5 for next week. Also out next week from Mad Cave Studios, we have Kill Train #2 from writer Olivia Quintero-Briggs with art from Martina Noel. So we know that she's found herself on one of the kill trains in New York City. But now we have to see if she's somehow able to survive and get home to her kids. So that was issue 1 was really good as it kind of set up the story of the kill train and how it's population control. And we see how Vanessa has made her way onto one, not thinking that it would, seeing that one had just happened. But we will see if she's able to survive and able to make it home to her kiddos. So the second issue is supposed to be out on this coming Wednesday. And then finally over at Mad Cave Studios, Pop Kill #1 from writers Jimmy Palmiotti, Dave Johnson with art from Juan Santa Cruz. So I originally backed this on Kickstarter when it was done back then. It was a few years ago. It was actually done on Kickstarter. So it's an interesting premise with how this story came about. Basically a war between cola companies. So again, I know what the story is about. I've already read it, following it since its time on Kickstarter. But again, if it's somehow able to make it to the top 5, we'll talk about it a little bit more. And so, again, bunch of stuff that I'll be reading for next week. And I hope you have your fill of comic books as well. I will see you all next time. That is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of the program. The Comic Bin Podcast, as well as the Comic Book Spot, are a part of the Comic Book Source family of sites and media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter X at comic_bin, or my personal account at BatmanFan_4Life. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. We're all over social media. You can also follow our sister site over at thebatmanuniverse.net for all of your news and reviews in the world of Batman. Tune in next time as we give you more in the world of comic books. Again, we truly appreciate your support. But until we meet again next time, keep reading those comics.